Mudawar. I am CEO of Women in Sales, and we are so excited that all of you are here today. We have an awesome discussion planned. We have a couple great panelists here with us. So you are here today for Data to Dollars, leveraging data insights to close more deals. So we are going to talk all about data, all about insights, and we always welcome any dialogue and conversations from those of you who are in the audience with us today too. So if you have questions throughout today's conversation, if there is anything you'd like to hear more about, please drop that in the chat so that we can get to it as we roll through today's conversation. But we're so happy you're here. Katie, Anna, thank you for being with us today. We are very excited for this conversation, and a special thank you to Tiger Eye for co-hosting today's event. So I think a really great place to start would be, Anna, can you tell everyone who Tiger Eye is, a little bit about the organization, and then of course about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. This is exciting. I think this is a great conversation and super timely as so many companies are getting to the second half of the year. I know for us at Tiger Eye, we help people with a modernized BI approach. So we sit on top of data and help them visualize that and answer questions about their business. I'm leading sales there. Before this, I was with the same founding team at our last startup. This company is a product of what we wished we had when we were growing our last startup. But yeah, leading sales here and continuing to grow.
Amazing. So happy to have you. Katie, can you introduce yourself as well?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. Katie Eggy. I lead the major accounts division at SalesLoft. And if anyone is unfamiliar with SalesLoft, we're a leading revenue orchestration platform. So we're actually quite complementary to the work Anna and her team are doing at Tiger Eye. But our goal is to assist in creating more pipeline, advancing that pipeline through the funnel, and ultimately closing more deals. So really excited for today's conversation. I've been in sales my entire career, and prior to joining SalesLoft, spent a considerable amount of time in the MarTech industry, quite comfortable with data and analytics and using that to drive truly actionable insights and business outcomes forward.
Amazing. Super excited. We have a perfect panel today to talk about this topic. So stay tuned. We're going to be chopping into a lot of information here very quickly. If you're joining us in the audience, let us know where you're joining from. And if there's a specific topic that you really want to hear about today, we would love to hear from you all so that we can tailor this conversation to exactly what it is that you care about most. So we're going to dive in. And I think a really great place to start would be understanding how each of you first got your start in sales. And if that was always the plan. We know some of us kind of quote unquote fell into sales, but others of us plan to go in. So Katie, let's start with you. What was your game plan first? Did you plan to go into sales? Did it just magically happen?
I did not plan to go into sales, but it was a profession that I was always organically drawn to, and I just didn't realize it at the start. I think back to the first couple of part-time jobs I had in college. I worked as a part-time phone sales representative for a local theater, and I also worked as a sales representative at Coach the handbag store. So clearly was drawn to the sales profession. But I've also always been drawn to opportunities to use data and insights to drive business outcomes forward, which is what brought me initially to the market research and MarTech industry. But my first role happened to be in a commercial function, which was the perfect balance for me because I loved everything about sales, relationship building, helping companies with their challenges, but using data and analytics the entire time as well.
Amazing. Amazing. Awesome. What about you, Anna?
I also had a bit of an unconventional path to sales. When I finished my undergrad, I rolled right into a master's program in psychology. But to do that, I had to support myself. So started as an inside sales rep in manufacturing. By the time I finished my degree and was offered a position in clinic, I'd already moved along the chain from ISR to sales, covering Caterpillar globally at that time. And, the path was a bit more lucrative to stay on the sales role. So I decided to roll my education right into my sales career, stayed on in manufacturing for a while before making the jump to SaaS software. Cut my teeth there at Oracle, as many people do, and then moved into the startup world at PlanGrid. It's been a wild ride, but it's really fun to be able to marry that education from a psychology background with selling to customers. I think they're a natural fit. I think, Katie, like you said, being able to help people solve problems, get people into the right solution. There's a lot of bridges between those two places. So while I appreciate the money I spent on my degree, it is definitely not a sales background, but I do think they complement each other.
That's okay. I was retail management. So who really knows, where we all come from and how we end up here. But I think it's awesome to hear that because we also have a lot of people who are constantly pivoting or thinking about a career switch. So it's great to hear that you can find success, even if it wasn't the path you initially chose to go down. So the other area that we all talked about this a little bit behind the scenes, and I think it's a really good conversation to have, is the idea of entrepreneurial sales behind the scenes. What does it mean to be an entrepreneurial seller? How do you apply this to your role today? How does it kind of factor into your personal style? And Anna, maybe we'll go to you first and then over to you, Katie.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my early days, entrepreneurial meant that you had grit and that you had some perseverance behind yourself. You were a self-starter and you knew how to dive in even when you were given a sheet of names. You could go figure it out. You treated your own book of business in whatever big company, small company, as if it was your own private business. Now, this is our Tiger Eyes, a second time startup, same foundational team. It feels a little bit different being an entrepreneur with a second time team. I know a lot more this time around going into this, but I came in pre-product, pre-revenue. So really seeing what it takes to drive brand awareness, understand how to find your product market fit from the ground up has been real scrappy. I think that there is a lot of bootstrapping when it comes to getting things off the ground, and that entrepreneurial spirit of skinning your knees, failing fast, being able to get back up. And then whether or not you just can't run out of creative juice in that side of the business. So it's just been fun to be able to throw a lot of things out, see what works, and then iterate quickly. Kaizen is a big part. It's a word that we use as a core value. And I think it really solidifies what we do, which is moving on quickly, not letting perfect get in the way of good, and moving forward. And I think that in whatever level you are at selling is super important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What about you, Katie?
Yes, well, I can second a lot of what Anna was just talking about there because it's so true. Is those are a lot of the core fundamental elements of what it means to be entrepreneurial. And in particular, I look back through my career and I certainly like to think that I've had a bit of an entrepreneurial bend as a common theme. I've worked at several companies with 25 employees, 50 employees, 100 employee total headcount. And that was really intentional because I love that entrepreneurial space. And to me, it also means building something, which I get a lot of joy from, is you have to put together all the puzzle pieces and figure out along the way the playbook for how do you succeed in your space, which is really exciting. And then being part of the entrepreneurial smaller organization, I also think you get to see the impact of the work you're doing at a much greater scale, which is very rewarding in that sense too. So I apply this, obviously SalesLoft is a significantly larger company, but I apply it in my current role today too, because the majors division at SalesLoft is new as of our fiscal flip in February. So we're standing up a new division and same thing, we're figuring out what the playbook is to be successful in major account sales at SalesLoft.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as we continue through this conversation, we're kind of starting at the beginning, the early days still. When we started out selling, I know for all of us, we probably remember those early days. We didn't have a lot. We had like a phone book, a landline, and a lot of hope in our hearts. I feel like that was the extent of the resources we had available. So we've come a long way since then. And as you reflect back on that time, what data did you have then versus where are we today with what data is available? And maybe even talk a little bit about what's stayed the same since those early days and what's actually changed until today. So Katie, let's start with you for that.
Yes. One thing I feel like has stayed consistent is we've always had data and there's always been a need for data. But what's changed, at least through my sales career, is how easy it is to access this data. And then how easy it is to take action based on that data. So previously, it was a very manual and time-consuming task to go and find this data, curate the data, and then synthesize it to an extent that you knew what actions to take from it. So that's the huge transformation that I've just seen the sales profession go throughout my career. In addition to how we've evolved to leverage more signal-based insights as part of our sales progression. So now it's looking for those signals. Is someone on our website, are they researching our industry? Because if so, we want to be part of that discussion. So I think that's another key change that's happened over the past several years.
Yes, Anna, and before we go over to you, I saw a comment from Eileen and she said, so true, I would add Google and prayers too. So yes, early days, we love it. What about
Lots
you?
of prayers. Lots of prayers went out at those days. Smile and dial. I think for me, I agree, Katie, like data's always been there. It's just the speed in which we had the access to it. But that doesn't mean this what you focus on hasn't changed much either. You still want to reach the most people in the shortest amount of time with the right message. But I do think we've got more automation to do that. So you get a lot of data in front of you. I think what makes a good salesperson today and keeps that sales cycle in a fast pace is being able to look at now you've got so much right in front of you, right? If you're using SalesLoft, for example, you've got a lot of data right in front of you to go make your dial and then put it in a sequence. Such a helpful tool, but how fast can you move and what makes it meaningful? And I think the thing that has stayed the same is that relationship selling and knowing who you're targeting with the right message at the right time is still the thing that gets the deals done the fastest. And I think in that sense, sellers just have to evolve in the technology space more so than in a soft skill space. You can always evolve those skills, but what made you a good seller 10 years ago is probably still going to make you a good seller today.
Anna, that's really poignant because I think it goes back to something I like to call sales math, right? Something that hasn't changed is even though we have all this new insight at our fingertips, we still need to understand how many activities do we need to take across what channels to then get us a certain number of meetings. So then those meetings then translate to opportunities that ultimately become close one business. So that is the fundamental sales math that we all need to understand. And that was what we needed to understand 10, 20 years ago. It's also what we need to understand today. But then how to make improvements along each step of the way is where we have a lot more advancements at our fingertips today.
Couldn't agree more.
Absolutely. And maybe to even take this conversation a layer deeper, as we think about business intelligence and analytics today versus 5, even 10 years ago, there's also been a ton of evolution as well. So we know that things are very different current state than they were before. What is, I guess for each of you, what does proactive look like today versus what it looked like in the past? And how is the business intelligence and analytics that are available today enabling you to make decisions faster for your businesses and for yourself as leaders? We'll start with you, Anna.
Yeah, so obviously this is the world that we live in at Tiger Eye. So I have these conversations every day with hundreds of businesses trying to understand why has BI not worked in the past for everybody when it comes to sales, marketing, customer success? What were the limiting factors, and how do we overcome that going forward? Personally, for me, I used to live off of spreadsheets, which was data that I pulled from a system. It was static from the moment I pulled it, but it was the most effective tool that I had as a seller or a manager, was organizing the data in a way that made sense to me. And so I think what has evolved is that our tools collect this data behind the scenes. We've got more real time to really analyze, how am I doing today, but how does this compare to where I was last week? It's really often a comparison that people need, but being able to access that in what I'll call ad hoc reporting has become more and more important, because a single dashboard view, while it might be helpful for an annual KPI, a lot of teams need to iterate more quickly. Even in a large corporate setting, your team is trying to iterate to stay ahead of competition. And those little pieces of data analysis that you might need to pull probably aren't on your dashboard. You might want to know something specific against a competitor compared over time just for your segment. Those are the things that the tools we need to expect more out of our tools. I feel like go-to-market people have always owned a number. We haven't always had access to all of the data that could contribute to telling us the story of how we get to that number. And I'm glad that tools are evolving to show us more.
Absolutely.
Yes. I mean, obviously, Anna, you work at Tiger Eye. I'm at SalesLoft. huge proponent for using technology available today to allow us to be more proactive. I mean, that's the benefit of the advancements of technology in this space is it can help us do just this. How do we take all the data? It's almost an overabundance of data, it can be overwhelming, and figure out how do we take actions that are going to move the needle from that data. So that's my biggest piece here is let's use the tools that are available to us. And there's so many options out there, and that can help us become more proactive and start with one thing. I think that's the other thing that gets people hung up is there is so much that we can look at and dig into and try to unpack that then we don't take any action because it can be overwhelming. So choosing 1, 2 areas to focus on, spend a little bit of time on that over a quarter or two, and then choose another area to unpack can also make it more manageable.
I think it's so interesting too, when I think about tools like SalesLoft and all the data that they bring in, my son always tells me I'm 150 years old. So I've been in sales almost a century. It's amazing. I know. But back in the day, when I think about the early days of Oracle for me, I would just work through task management, right? It was like from manufacturing, it was like a FIFO line, first in, first out. It was like, this is the list I'm calling because I didn't really have what you were talking about before, those signals to tell me that somebody should have been a higher priority. So it was a smile, a call, a follow-up note to put them at the bottom of the queue for the next thing. And what looked good then was getting through a lot of tasks in a day. And now, while you might still have the same number of tasks, you can rearrange those based on the signals that you're getting. Somebody downloading a white paper, or they were on your website, or they interacted with something on social. You have more information to target them at that right time, even if the same message would have been given a week later. Sometimes it's like getting in their inbox at the right time. I was just thinking about that. And I think that is where sellers today have the advantage of technology to help them be proactive, even on an individual task level, can get so detailed. But I think the best sellers are using every tool to their advantage to play from ahead.
Absolutely. Yep. Could not agree more. And I feel like I think there is a really fine line between technology fatigue and report fatigue, where we're looking at so many data points that we overwhelm ourselves, and then using this information to help guide us in our sales strategy. So where we're heading next is really talking about the question of the hour, which is, what are some of the ways that data can be used to help teams close deals faster? I know that's really like the big marquee question, and there's been a lot of chatter about this over the last few years. So I'm going to be very interested to hear both of your takes. But also, even more specifically on this question, would love to hear from each of you about what reports your team most frequently uses, because I think that would be really interesting as you're looking and sourcing new deals. And if there are specific signals that you're looking out for too, that are kind of some fan favorites. I know our members always love to hear that type of information too. So Katie, let's start with you for this, and then we'll go to you, Anna.
Yeah, so I think about, okay, what data will help us close deals faster? And the starting point there is to do a comparison between, let's look at deals that were not the right fit, not ideal opportunities for us as a company. So whether that was they never became closed won opportunities, whether that's they weren't the right fit for our product solution, or whether they took a disproportionate amount of time and resources to become an opportunity. So we put those opportunities in one bucket, and then we compare those sales cycles to ones that we deem were a great fit for our business. So they were an ideal profile for us. They took the right amount of investment of resources from our side to execute, and ultimately became closed won business for us. Then doing a comparison between those two cohorts, there will be different themes that emerge between the two. And it really is hard to say what those might be because it's so different based on industry, persona that you're working with. But I would say that's the starting point, is to do that cohort analysis, look for themes. And then to the point I said earlier, it can be overwhelming to try and tackle everything at once. So once you've identified some themes, choose 1, 2 max, and focus on that for 1 to 2 quarters. You should start to see some improvement in the sales cycle length. So that would be the starting point. I don't know, Anna, if you'd like to build anything on that.
Yeah, I think along with knowing those numbers, having your baselines, right? I think there's a lot of companies out there that may say, oh, our renewal rate is this, our expansion rate is this, and these are these high level numbers. but being able to break those down to your individual teams or maybe even your individual seller to understand what their baseline is today, and then being able to track, almost like keep a pulse on those things. And that's where I think real-time analytics, being able to have data that translates into, again, let's call us practitioners, right? We're the ones that are out with customers. Practitioner language is different than operator language. Operators can, you can ask your RevOps folks to pull you something, and their version of data might not translate into what your team is telling you or maybe what you needed. So I think it's really important, especially in sales leadership and on a sales team, you're getting that feedback. We're getting crushed out here from this competitor. You really need tools that you can then turn around and pull this data in real time, in your own language, the way your team is describing it to you, and find those anomalies, those win repetitions, those loss repetitions, whatever they might be, and then dig into it from there. But I think there's sometimes a disconnect, or there has been, between what the field sees and what we hear from customers, and then being able to go find, validate that inside of data. And I think the more that BI and sales systems connect data into, bigger, broader buckets so that you can search and query them quickly, I think that is really speeding that evolution up. For me, the reports I use often are always the what's changed. I used to call it trying to find that needle in a haystack all the time in my past life. Someone would call, something has changed. Our sales force looks different. I lost this. I don't know where it went in the system. It's in the Neverland somewhere. And being able to find reports that just show you like what changed over time. Can I filter this for what changed in the last day? Quarter end used to be nuts trying to find data. So being able to have systems, TigerEye does this really well. Things like SalesLoft track things over time for you. I mean, we have a lot of systems that are either using AI or just real-time analytics to give you this data and fine tune those like changes, and those diffs and deltas, I think, have been most important for me.
I'd say quarter end is still nuts, but in a different way. And then to build on your report piece, right? Some of the reports that I like to lean on. So starting with pipeline, right? So I love to look at how much pipeline have we created week over week, and then the activities that led to that pipeline. I think it's really important to track this because it can be so easy to get off track. 1 week becomes 2 weeks, becomes 3 weeks, and all of a sudden you have a pretty big gap you need to solve for. So constantly looking at total activities across phone calls, emails, LinkedIn messages, in-person meetings, and then any different type of creative activations we're trying to deploy, how that generated pipeline. And then when we have pipeline established that we're working through our sales cycle, there's so many different fields that you can look at. But some of my favorite ones are looking at what's the compelling event, right? Because you can start to then look for themes of, are there certain compelling events that create stronger outcomes for all parties involved? Who are the stakeholders we're working with? So who's our primary point of contact, but do we have executive engagement? Because in the modern day sale, you need executive alignment to get any type of contract across the finish line. So also looking at what type of people are we talking to throughout the sales cycle, looking at what was our last step, what's our next step, is it scheduled? And then finally, we're really big into mutual action plans. So have we gotten to the point with our customer, with our buyer, that we've aligned on a mutual success plan? How is this deal going to get to the finish line? What actions are we going to do at SalesLoft, and what actions are they going to do from their side? So those are some of the reports that I spend the most time looking into. And then those are some of the areas you can look for themes around: when did those milestones get met? And were they ever met? And you can start to look for some really interesting trends from that.
I think the buyer's journey has also really evolved in this area. So buyers come in, they've got AI they can go to Gemini or ChatGPT and research a lot of companies very quickly. They're doing a lot more before they even schedule that first demo or put it out to an RFP, whatever that might look like for their process. They're coming in far more educated than folks have in the past, which is a benefit. It's a blessing and a curse, right? You just can't often book a random demo any day now. So, maybe the SDR team is having to figure out some new strategies. But I do think one thing that data has helped us with is really the full life cycle. So you talked a lot about like the funnel and being able to help find those areas to move the deals along. But as sellers also look at how customers, their install base, is using their platform, you can find insights from your CS team as well on what parts of the product are people using today, what has become most important in our product, what persona inside of there is using that, and then tie that back to the beginning story. So it's like that, you really connecting the top of the funnel to the end of the life cycle. And the renewal teams are always doing that, but bringing that back to the SDR team, I think you can get even unique stories and use cases based on customers that have been using it forever, but now are finding a different feature more successful for them than they had in the past.
Yeah, I love that, Anna, because it goes to the other point about signals, right? And I think a lot of people think signals are only external sources of information, but there can be so many types of custom internal signals as well. And particularly as you look at your existing customer base, what are those signals that they're interested in a potential upsell or potential expansion of their contract? What behaviors of them engaging with the platform or certain features would indicate that it's time to have a discussion around how do we continue to build the partnership. So that's another really valuable type of signal.
Absolutely. Well, I think a cool place to go with this too is we talk a lot about the data that we have access to, the plethora of data that we have available today. But a lot of people are probably wondering, what do we do with this? What are some, so I think for each of you, I'd love to hear about an initiative or initiatives that you have actually launched or built out based on data that you have actually collected for your companies. So Anna, why don't you kick us off?
A big one for me, I'll go back to my past life. Our first startup was acquired by Autodesk, so I got to manage a large team in the mid-market division there. And what we were always looking for is like, how much further ahead can you see? So really trying to use data to say, yes, we've got our deals this quarter that are in flight. In the mid-market world, that was maybe a handful of deals per rep, dozens of deals that I was managing at that time, but they were 9-month sales cycles. So like they were at the end, they seemed good. So it's like, well, all right, now let's focus on the next quarter ahead. But how many quarters can you really look ahead and start to get signals on? So trying to help organize from a top down what the macro view was. What have we seen that's changing in the business that we can start to help our sellers look further around the corner to plant more seeds or more opportunities for expansion? And the way that I was leveraging that data was probably being kind of annoying to our RevOps team, right? I had my dashboards that answered a question for me, which is great, but I was submitting tickets all the time. Can you pull this data? I want to see a comparison over time. And now obviously I'm at a company that does that for teams. And I have the advantage today, even though my team is much smaller, of being able to take this in real time, ask a question, get the analysis back. And so what I've seen is that by being able to speed it up, I think even if I had had this tool at a large organization, I could have operated my team much more like a startup. We can move quickly today because we're close knit, we're all in communication, and I have all of this data at my fingertips. So we can iterate and Kaizen quickly. But I think this can be applied if you have that access and you're able to apply it to your own team, even in a super large organization. So I think I would have done more of that back in the day if I had access. But yeah, it's really all about how far you can stretch yourself ahead to really be as proactive as possible.
Absolutely. What about you, Katie? Anything exciting that you've done initiative-wise with some of the data that you have been collecting?
Yes. So being in major account sales, there's this big question that's top of mind for a lot of people right now, which is volume still needed in enterprise sales? It's a very, very hot topic. So we ran a pilot to determine, is it volume still needed? And yes, this is a directional pilot. It was just at SalesLoft across my team, but we wanted to make sure that we were pointing the ship in the right direction before we continued on our course. So what we did is across my team, we had different reps alternate types of behavior over a 6-week period. And this was in parts that we didn't have a particular week with a significant drop in activity across the whole team. So we alternated. And I had reps 1 week double their standard activity metric. So I said, okay, let's take what you typically do in a week, do 2 times that amount of activity. And then next week, I don't care about activity metrics, but every touch you do, make sure it's hyper personalized, hyper research, spend that extra time curating it. And over 6 weeks across several reps on my team, we compared outcomes from this. What we found is that volume is still needed, believe it or not. The weeks where we doubled our activity, we got more pipeline those weeks. And it's not to say that personalization doesn't matter. In the volume weeks, we're still doing personalization, but it is that personalization at scale. And you still have to get your name out there. You still have to find the buyers at the right time. And it does take volume to make that happen in this market. So then what did we do based on these learnings? We initiated what we called a pipe gen week. And this is likely something we'll continue to repeat perhaps once a quarter. So we took 1 week and every rep on my team, we canceled all internal meetings for that week. So every single meeting that we typically would have canceled unless they really needed to connect with someone internally for something. Of course, that could still happen. And then we said, okay, this extra time that you've gotten back in your week, use all of that time for prospecting and do more volume and more activity. And then each day we had a 15-minute stand up at the end of the day to discuss what went well today, what didn't go well. Let's learn and iterate for the next day so we can continue to refine our approach. And this worked. We did 2 times the amount of pipeline generation in Pipe Gen Week than we do in a typical week. Now, it's not sustainable to operate every week like that. You still need internal meetings and they still have a very important purpose. But I think there's something to be said for being very intentional about protecting that time in our calendar and when possible, finding even more time to lean into because this is enterprise sales and it still gets us more pipeline when we put in the extra time and extra activity metrics to get to those outcomes. So that's the story I have to share with you.
That is interesting. I was wondering where you were headed because my background is all enterprise sales. So I was like, ooh, I would be very curious to see because very much we had to balance those 2 things. You still had to have quantity and quality in order to drive results. So it's very cool to see that in a scope of what is happening today. Because I think there is this messaging that's happening on social media. It's like, don't even bother prospecting into enterprise segments if you don't have the most like hyper personalized, very well crafted, very well researched. And so it's not to say that those won't be successful, but it is to say there's a level of personalization and using a lot of the data that we have available today that we can do without spending like 30 minutes per email. At some point, we also have to cast a wide enough net to drive results. So that is a very cool example. Thank you for sharing that.
Katie, I'm so curious. What the weeks that you guys do the double activity, do you have those strategically placed in the quarter or in the month? How did you decide which week it was going to be?
Yes. So my recommendation would be do the first month of your quarter, especially in enterprise sales, a best case scenario 90-day sales cycle most of the time. So you want to have Pipe Gen Week as early in the quarter as possible. Of course, you got to balance QBRs and other things like that, but as early as you can, because then you stand a chance of that pipeline converting in the same quarter so you can really reap the rewards.
I feel like that's so practical. I'm probably going to steal it. I'll let you know how it goes.
Hopefully you also get 2 times pipeline generation.
I love it.
Love it. And if anybody who's in the audience today has also done and launched similar initiatives where you've used some of the existing data or you've run like experimental things, drop that in the chat too, because I think it'd be really interesting to hear from all of you about some of the ways that you have used some of the data you have available and then what you actually did with it. So if you are brave enough, please drop it in the chat. We would love to hear from you as well. And where we're going to head next is a little bit of a turn here. So we've talked a lot about the data that's available today, what it looked like in the past, what we're actually doing with that data. Now I think there's a big kind of category that is starting to come up more, and I think it's going to be really interesting to keep an eye on for the next couple of years here. But when we think about performance reviews and the ability to be a strong leader, to be able to coach, how is all of what we're talking about, how is this influencing how you lead today? How is the data that you have available today versus 5-10 years ago changing the way that you're leading your team? And how is that actually affecting forecasting? Because we know our AE friends out there love updating their Salesforce reports. So please, if you can start us off, Anna, would love to hear a little bit on this topic from you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I still hold myself in sales leadership to the how and the what, right? There's always going to be a what component, what they need to get done, what they need to hit. metrics driven, outcome driven. But the how, those things have evolved as well. But I do think there's always two sides of the coin. The what part, I feel like we've got more measurements than ever. We can track every email, every call, every touch point. You need to have, some people would say you need to have clean data, but a lot of the systems automate most of these points for you. So they're just tethered in the background and can give you this, whether it's a power dialer, scripts that you're following on screen. There's just a lot of tools to tell us that backward sales math if the what is happening. Where I see the most evolution in what makes people good is understanding the how, not only the psychology around it with this multi-threaded approach, this ability to strike at the right time with the right message, knowing if you're going to go ground up or top down in an account right out of the gate. There's just a lot more A/B testing. So I think when you have the tools to combine the volume and the metrics to test, you also give yourself the ability to A/B test some of this stuff. So the best sellers are doing this naturally. They're not being told that they have to. They're not putting these in, sequences because a manager or director told them they have to do it this way. They're going out and finding that creative tenacity to be scrappy in their own set of accounts, to test these theories, to figure out what's working for their set of accounts and whether it's a geo, an industry, whatever it might be, to use these things to their advantage. How we grade them. Also, there's some generational changes. We balance work and life a little bit more. We, look at a whole person differently in the workplace today than we did 20 years ago. And so I do think we're gentler in terms of the how and the coaching and really trying to consider people. I think sales used to, there's a culture that it was associated with sales. And I think we've evolved from it and expect more out of people. It also means you need to be good at a lot of things. It is a multifaceted job. So I'm always looking for people that can apply what they do in the real world outside of work and how they bring those things in. Authenticity is still going to win here, though. So no matter how much data you have, if your seller can be authentic to themselves and figure out what their story is and their message for what they sell with their buyers, it's always going to translate the best. So helping people bring that out is something I've continued to focus on in grading people and helping them grow.
Absolutely. And Stacy Bryant added a really cool comment in the chat here. So I just wanted to highlight it really quick. As a leader, it goes back to building pipeline earlier in the quarter. Leaders need to stay accountable to mid-quarter check-in on funnel/pipeline progress. What's sticking, what's not. It allows for time to correct before end of quarter. Could not agree more, because how many times have you had conversations and we're like 1 week out from the end of quarter? There's only so much you can do with a deal when you have like less than 5 business days. So very well stated, Stacy. I think that's a great addition to the conversation here.
I love to operate as if end of quarter is 2 months before the actual end of quarter.
Yes,
It's amazing the behaviors and actions that can be inspired in the final 2 weeks of a quarter. Let's try and do some of that earlier in the quarter. It will save everyone a lot of stress.
Yes, if only we could all get behind that. But yes, I feel like, but then on the same token, I'm like, I do feel like as sellers, we are in a constant state of stress. So I'm like, do we just live in the fact that we have quota every single day now? I'm not sure.
One thing that I had to overcome early in my leadership days was pulling from the bucket ahead. So I feel like when you get to end of quarter or whatever your forecast might have been, and you are feeling desperate for a deal, a lot of times the model was, let's look ahead and see what we can pull in. I don't think that's bad sometimes, but you're just pulling from that next bucket. So if you see that as a trend in your business, that have a lot of pull aheads at the end, that third month of a quarter, that might be something to unpack. It's something that I know I tried routinely to unpack. Yes, it's nice to have an ace in your pocket if you need it. But in order to get there, you're just depleting your next pipeline. And then your lead gen needs to work twice as hard to fill that back up in a short period of time. So using the data that you can see on these macro trends that you might have quarter over quarter does help you kind of push that look ahead out even further. I think that's something that I had to learn by failing at, honestly, over time. But now we've got tools that help us. So I feel like, sellers and managers today can do it a little bit better than we maybe had to 20 years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's so much information. I mean, conversely, if you're Yeah, I just think there's so much information at our fingertips that wasn't there before. So as sellers, we have to also be able to see some of those trends for ourselves. And so we can partner with our leaders internally, but we also need to be able to understand like, hey, if at the last day of every quarter, I am scrambling to close whatever's in my book, that is also a trend to follow. That's something to look into. Why does this continue to happen quarter over quarter? And if we're losing deals for the same reasons, why is that continuing to happen? Is there something in my talk track? Is there somewhere that I'm specifically losing deals? Those are the types of insights that are so critical to level up as a seller. And I think those are also great, to back to this question, great coaching opportunities as leaders is understanding where is my team actually losing their deals? What are the roadblocks that maybe my reps aren't seeing? And how do I kind of address those and make sure that they're aware of those so that they can get better? Katie, anything else to add here before we move forward?
Yeah, so this is where I put my Sales Loft hat on, because obviously working at Sales Loft, we live and breathe Sales Loft and use our platform every single day. So I lean into Sales Loft for coaching. And this is where, because of how much data and insights we have at our fingertips today, I think as leaders, we're savvier, but reps are getting very savvy with this data too. They crave this data. They want to see the data, learn from it, take actions from it. So this is where in my weekly one-on-ones with my team, I will share my screen. I'll pull up the coaching module in Sales Loft, share my screen so the rep can see exactly what I'm looking at, and we have a discussion. And it does go back, so I'm very outcomes driven from a leadership perspective. So are we meeting quota? Are we meeting our numbers? Then this discussion is going to be more so about how do we continue to remove blockers to just maximize your runway. But if we're not meeting quota, then we start working our way back down. So it's like, okay, if we're not meeting quota, do we have the opportunities to get there? If we don't have the opportunities to get there, do we have the meetings to get the opportunities? And then finally, if not, okay, we need to drill into activity. So that's where a dashboard in Sales Loft pulls up all these different metrics, and we can really start to drill into the areas of concern. And then this is where the coaching becomes extra helpful, because first you can identify where are those gaps. But then once you've identified the gap, you can double click right into it. So maybe it's, okay, our emails are not getting a high enough response rate to then get the meetings we're looking for on our calendar. So let's figure out what's going on there. Let's look at the messaging. Is the messaging different across our tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 prospects? And then when we do get response rates, did you do something different there? Can we replicate that across a wider arrangement of your prospects, right? So it's really starting to hone in on whatever pocket is of most challenge to the rep. And then when they see how you reach those conclusions, how you navigate to the answers and recommendations, it also then empowers them to do some of that coaching on their own.
Absolutely. Very well said. And also, if you're in the audience, let us know how you're using data to manage reps on your team, how you're kind of using these insights to better understand how to level up as a leader too, because I think these are really good areas that we can share with one another here and learn from one another. And as we near the end of this conversation, which is kind of crazy, I feel like we just hopped on, we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about interdepartmental collaboration. So I feel like the age-old one is sales and marketing. How do we work together? How do we best cooperate? What KPIs are we each tracking? What data do we each care about? So you can definitely use sales and marketing as a reference point, or any other internal department, but would love to hear from both of you about, what tools and data that you are sharing most often between teams internally, and if there's any lessons learned, as you're thinking about how you collaborate with those teams and when you're sharing that data, just so that we can kind of share that and figure out where are the opportunities to save time and deliver value. So Katie, let's start with you for this one.
Yes. So I like to think that Sales Loft, sales and marketing do quite a good job of collaborating. I think we've come a long way just as two different professions as to how do we get to those, because at the end of the day, we're driving to the same outcomes. So the reports that we look at most frequently across sales and marketing are what sources generated pipeline, and then did that pipeline become close won business? And we look for trends in those two areas. What are our best generating pipeline sources? And then which of those opportunities became close won business for us? And we spend a lot of time across sales and marketing diving into those reports. Something that SalesLoft has done that I think is really, really valuable is we actually have a department that we call the Office of Pipeline. And so what this department specifically does, I know it's a fun name, is it serves as that connection point between sales and marketing. So the Office of Pipeline attends all the marketing meetings, understands the different initiatives and messaging activations underway, and also is really up to speed on the sales team OKRs, numbers, objectives, and can serve as that connection point to make sure that we truly are moving in the same direction. Then the Office of Pipeline will be that coordination point of, okay, when do we actually need to come together and have meetings to discuss, we have these events coming up, how are we going to maximize our results from these events? Or let's put together some messaging to take to market and make sure that the sales team feels like it meets what they're looking for, but that marketing feels like it's cohesive with our brand narrative. So I think that's another really interesting way of looking at collaboration, is actually having a team to facilitate some of that. And it also saves time from both departments, so that when we do meet, it's really productive time spent together.
Ooh, I love that. I think that's so cool to have like a named team as well. I wish we all had access to that, but I think back to early days, and you have like your VP of sales would go to IT's meeting and try to distill out like some of the key takeaways, and then IT's in the sales meeting, they send like one representative, and I'm sure we all know how that goes. A lot of times it's like, oh yeah, engineering's working on like something like this, that they can't explain it. It's too technical. It doesn't make any sense. And so I think it's such a good idea to have a dedicated resource that is also somewhat of like a neutral party. I think that's like a really key piece, is that neutrality, because then they can show up to those places and it's not like everything's from the lens of how is sales going to get their number or what are marketing's OKRs. Like they're coming at it from like a more neutral standpoint. I think that's a great insight and really good idea. What about you, Anna?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want that department. So I'm gonna have to go suggest it to the rest of my executive team now. I do think the neutrality comes from like when I think of that original tension between sales and marketing, and I do think there's tension in other places too in businesses on go to market, but that foundational tension for me always came from different definitions. So we would get through a quarter on the sales side. We've busted our butts to get to a number. We feel successful, but we feel like it was a struggle. And like we felt one way about the quarter. And then I would have colleagues in a different department, we'll call it marketing, that are like, oh, we passed so many, we were fantastic. We hit it out of the park. And it would be like, wait, how do you feel so differently about this quarter than we do, when the outcome is clear? This is the number we got to. This is how these things converted. And then it would come down to these definitions. How did marketing measure a win rate? What was their win rate? What was their goal on that? What conversion rates are they using? And what is the difference between that? And so often marketers might have access to one system that can see from first touch through turned into a sales lead. And then, I often would see where it kind of got picked up, maybe a step or two behind, that would translate into my CRM side, and then follow that through. So, in a Venn diagram, we didn't actually have all of the data in the same place. And we were looking at different sides of the equation. And we might not have been using the same math to calculate the same things. We could show up at an internal QBR, and their stats might look different than my stats, which are always surprising. I thought maybe marketing dropped the ball, and they're like, we crushed it. And our definitions were just a little bit off. So I do think making sure that you either have the neutral team that's helping, or you come together cross-departmentally to make sure that you're all playing from the same sheet of music in terms of those definitions and metrics are just really important. And then being able to access the data from start to finish, which can be difficult. Obviously, it's the world I live in again, but being able to run and query data from start to finish and tie like that invisible string through each part of it, knowing which campaigns work, which ones don't, which ones work even down to the right region, right? Something that you might do on the West Coast might not, I'm from Minnesota, it might not work in Minnesota. Midwest people are a little bit different than coastal people. So like you might have some variances that you need to tweak. And those are the conversations you want to have department to department It's like, hey, we're looking at this, and while it might have worked globally in central, this isn't landing. What can we do to change that? So I think it's both that what's happening, and then also how you communicate that and work cross departmentally.
Absolutely. To this day, I will never understand why we have never just all aligned on revenue. I feel like it all comes back to revenue, and we will pick every KPI, OKR, whatever number to track except for actual revenue. But yes, you're totally right, Anna. I think you unlocked memories for me of, just really struggling, like one team celebrating. They're like, we had the best quarter ever. And then you have like sales, like we had an awful quarter. How could that possibly be the case? And just more of a reason to need to collaborate internally. And I think as you move to a place where you kind of win and lose as a group, it changes the culture, it changes the dynamic as well. So I think this is a really critical conversation and some really good ideas here. So whoever's company has the resources to build this out, I'd say steal Katie's idea.
One thing that I've seen put into place more frequently as well, especially where there's maybe it's the size of the company or just how defined each channel is, from marketing to sales development and lead gen to sales to customer success and maybe the renewals team. If you are able to apply a metric for how each person is graded, about how they leave it for the next person, and they're invested in the outcome for the person behind them in that chain. So again, like an SDR measured on demos booked might not be the right one, but it might be on demos completed or demos that make it to a certain sales stage because of the volume of your business. Now, each business is a little bit different, but I think when you are tied to the outcome of the person that you're handing it off to, you also are naturally more invested in quality and hitting your metric with quantity. But it's always that little bit about like leaving it nicer for the person next to you. However you can build that into your process from start to finish as an executive team, I think there's a lot of success in that as well.
And Anna, I'm curious your take from like a go-to-market perspective. Do you feel like we've improved with definitions and setting the right metrics that you were just discussing, or do you still feel like there's a long way we have to go?
I think different tools separated that for us. So maybe if they had a marketing tool that was measuring things, the data going into that might just naturally measure it different than if you had a CRM. So not everything syncs 100%. So when people only have access to their own native systems, you're going to find inconsistencies. That's where the world of BI or the world of data lakes, where you can put things into a more, homogeneous setting and then query from a bigger like umbrella, that can help standardize a little bit. Also getting all of your executives C-level down to agree on what is revenue, what counts as revenue, what's our definition of a customer. I'm always surprised when we set customers up on TigerEye, and I'm like, how do you guys define a customer? And then you've got sales and customer success kind of looking at each other like, how do we define a customer? There are more nits in data measurement than some teams have dug into. So finding your baseline, figuring out where your gotchas might be, and then solving for that. Sometimes it's just a one-time fix, which is nice. And then you can kind of set it and move forward. But yeah, sometimes I think it's the lack of access to the same data that really holds us up.
Absolutely. And we're heading towards the very end of the conversation here, but I did drop a link in the chat for Anna's calendar. So if you'd like to chat with Anna, learn more about TigerEye, figure out how you can, get this data to communicate across your org, highly recommend taking Anna up on that opportunity. Worst case scenario, you have a great conversation with a wonderful human being. So you really have nothing to lose there. So definitely make sure to grab her meeting link in the chat here. And we're going to round out with the topic that I feel like you both knew was probably coming. And that is, of course, AI. Everybody is talking about AI, future of sales, where we're headed next. So we know that AI is rapidly evolving. We're seeing it happen in real time, basically on a daily basis. So where do each of you see the future of data / insights kind of heading next? And bonus points or bonus question, really, what is on your personal AI wish list that doesn't exist yet? So kind of a toughie two-parter. Let's start with you, Katie.
Okay, so goes back to what we were talking about earlier, but I do think AI will continue to evolve more and more in the coaching space. So there's been a lot of enhancements with AI for go-to-market teams when it comes to pipeline. So whether that's curating emails, sending emails, even just synthesizing different content into something that's going to be relevant, timely messaging. AI is excelling on that front. There are certainly AI coaching capabilities out there, but I think we're going to see that get to a whole nother level in the next 1 to 2 years. So that's my prediction as to where I see it heading next, because it is time consuming. It's so personalized and individualized that more capabilities on that front will help organizations achieve outcomes at an even greater rate. And then, I think that answered all the points of that question.
Sure did. Yes. Anna, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, AI is really about speed, right? It's taking something as simple. For example, I just planned a road trip. I took my family on a road trip from Minnesota to Michigan. Back in the day, I would have researched the Google map, mapped out how long it would take to drive, then done separate research on maybe the hotels that we'd stay at, and then also maybe do some Google research on like where to stop with the kids along the way. That would be interesting. It would have been a time consuming process for me to just map this out. Whereas I can just throw the prompt into ChatGPT, plan a road trip, the ideal road trip for me, my kid's age. We want to drive this long. This is our destination. Give me the best places to stay that are family friendly. And in a matter of seconds, this is not only planned it, but organized it for me to put it in an email. I mean, that evolution of time and research to, one-click outcomes is where I think AI truly excels today. I think there are opportunities for it in the future to be more agent-like and act on our behalf to automate activities. But as it is today, it's all about the synthesizing of this data, so I don't have to spend as much time on it. The one thing I think that I hope to see is AI platform consolidation. Every tool right now has its own AI, and you have to go in and you have to really understand, you have to be almost like a prompt expert per platform. And that can be difficult to understand the uniqueness of each component of AI per product. So like we've got platforms for everything else. I imagine AI platforms are going to come together and help you leverage each of the individual technologies. Haven't seen it today, but I would love, those single interfaces. I like to be, one-stop shop kind of person when it comes to my job. And I think people like to be routine. So if you can use things either more natively in the tool or they roll up into a platform, my dream AI is just one single chat on my computer. And someone will build that for me someday.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Mine, I don't know if it exists yet, but I think it'd be cool. Or if it does exist, I don't think it is where it needs to be. But if you're on discovery calls or any kind of call conversation, the ability for it to give you answers in real time. So if someone's like, oh, what are the platforms you integrate with? And it's like SalesLoft, TigerEye, Women, whatever. But for it to do it instantaneously versus like some kind of delay loading period, so that it would almost be like pure conversational. I think that'd be really cool. And especially for like ramping reps, I think it'd be interesting to like have those answers and be able to help them ramp more quickly.
We gotta go to our listening tools on that. Our call recording tools help us out here, like in real time. And wouldn't it be even more amazing if you didn't have to type it in, if it just like listened to the call and knew what you were answering? Like, make it even easier for me.
Someone invent this. That's what I'm talking about. You say it like your prospect asks the question in a real time. It just shoots out. It's like, oh yeah, here's the 12 platforms. I'm like, and then you sound amazing as the seller. So whoever's out there, if you have the ability to build that, someone says it exists. Okay. I'll be curious
when you find out. You remember that name, you let us know.
Let me know if you find out. Send it to me on LinkedIn because I want to do some digging. But thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much to the TigerEye team for co-hosting this webinar together. We had a lot of fun planning this. Anna, Katie, thank you so much for being there. Christina is here in spirit too. She wasn't able to get onto the platform, but she's with us. So thank you all for being part of this conversation. We wish you the best in taking all of your beloved data and insights and making them into something that is going to help you close even more deals for your own organization. So we will see you at the next event. I hope many of you take Anna up on the opportunity to meet after this event, and we'll see everyone at the next one. Take care.
Thanks, Alexine.